I'm Kayla, I'm 18 and I'm from Chelmsford. I don't identify with a label because I don't feel comfortable trying to define myself. I feel like when I give myself a label, I'm putting myself in a box. I tend to use queer because that's an overarching umbrella term. I have friends who identify as bisexual or pansexual, who feel comfortable giving themselves a label because it gives them a sense of security. However, when I was younger and first sort of began to realise I wasn't straight, I searched really hard for a label. I tried to identify with bi or pan, and I didn't feel comfortable. I felt like I was forcing myself to be something I wasn't. And in the end, I thought to myself, I'll just wait and see if one finds me. But eventually, I didn't so much as give up, but resign myself to anything, but more I feel comfortable just being me. I don't want to give myself that restriction. Some people may find comfort in it, others don't, but that does sort of come with its own challenges, because if I tell people I'm queer, I often get really quizzed on it. Like, I don't get to just say what I am and then move on. People often ask if that means that I'm bisexual, and they try to almost label me for me. I've been asked before, for example, by like my former boss, for about 10-15 minutes he was trying to force the label bisexual on me. So eventually I just said, fine, I'm bi, just to get him to stop. But it doesn't feel right when someone's constantly saying to you, okay, so you're attracted to men? And I go, yes. Are you attracted to women? I say, yes. Are you attracted to people without a gender? That one's not often asked to me, but it is still something that, yes, I am. It doesn't really matter what someone is to me. And they'll say, oh, so you're bisexual then? And I'll say, no, that's not how I choose to present myself. And it sucks when people feel like they have to force something upon you when it's not hurting anyone, me not identifying as a label. As well as only a few days ago, actually, I told someone I was queer and they told me not to use that word because it was offensive. And I don't find it offensive. There are offensive slurs against the LGBT community, but queer is, I feel, a label I can reclaim and be proud of. And so it hurts when I'm told that I'm not allowed to use language for my own community. I don't have a specific defining light bulb moment for when I realised I wasn't straight, but I guess I always sort of knew ever since I was young. I have this memory of being, I think I was probably about 11, back before I knew there were other terms other than gay and lesbian and straight. I thought that was all that you could be. There wasn't a middle ground. I remember insisting, only to myself, like privately, that I wasn't gay, but I also think I knew in my heart of hearts that I wasn't straight either, but because I didn't have an understanding of there being more than those options, I repressed it for quite a while. I mean, I don't remember learning of other identities, but eventually I did, and that's when I kind of admitted to myself that I wasn't straight and that was okay, which is when I rushed to try and find myself a label, but eventually none of those fit, and now I'm happy just being queer, being me, not forcing myself to fit into any of those categories that I tried to when I was younger. If I find a label that fits me one day, I do, but I can't. I'm not actively looking for a label, and I'm perfectly happy not giving myself one. The only struggle with that is having people who question me and try and force me to find a label, like they're almost trying to diagnose me, which always feels weird and wrong. Or that, or I have to end up giving them a lesson. And I'm like, I'm happy to talk to you about it, but I don't want to be interrogated, and I'm not here to sit and tell you all about the LGBT community just because I don't want to give myself a label. And, you know, I'm at work, or I'm at a shop, or I'm with my friends, or I'm at school or something. I'm not here to be ready to climb up on the soapbox at a moment's notice because someone demands it. One of the first times I experienced outright like homophobic language towards me was during my first week of year 7. I was always quite an anxious, sort of loner as a kid anyway. But moving up to year 7 is a scary experience for everyone because when you're in primary school, you know everyone and your school is quite small and you're used to routine. And then moving up to year 7, you go into this massive school with hundreds, thousands of people you don't know, and you're the youngest out of like 7 years, like year groups, and it's completely alien to you. So I felt isolated and alone enough. But during that first week, I remember 2 boys in my tutor group followed me as I was walking home, and they threw sticks and stones at me and called me a lesbian repeatedly and slapped me in the face. Which, as hard as dealing with being a year 7 is, it's much harder when you're having to deal with experiences like that. It made me feel vulnerable, it made me feel like a victim, and I didn't want to be that. I just wanted to, you know, adjust to this new school. And it was the first of plenty of other events that happened. People would refuse to touch me because they said I had a disease, or I'd often hear like gay being used as an insult. So that's so gay being used to describe something negatively, and that hurts more than at first you think it would. And even if it's not meant in a homophobic way, it's still associating being gay with something negative when all that someone means is the word stupid. And that hurts because if you overhear that sort of language, it encourages this stigma around being a part of the LGBT community, and it made me feel more alone, which was awful because I felt quite alone in my home life. My family aren't very open to the LGBT community, so I didn't have that safe space at home. So not having that safe space at school as well was made me feel very alone, very isolated. I missed most of my year 9 due to mental illness, and my counsellor didn't think I'd actually go back to school. They thought I'd end up being some dropout. Almost in spite, I felt like it was important that I went back and tried to make something of myself. It's easy to give up, and I didn't want to take the easy route. When it comes to at-home experiences, I didn't get the best, which is quite common for a lot of LGBT kids. My dad is very actively homophobic. He doesn't know I'm a part of the community. I feel like my sisters probably suspect, but he has no idea, and I'm very happy about that because he is actively quite... I hear him use very horrible language, and it hurts because I feel if I don't laugh along or nod along, or even if I just stand there silently, I know he'll start to suspect something, or he'll assume that I'm part of the community, which is horrible because even though I am queer, it shouldn't mean just because if you're standing up for the LGBT community, that doesn't mean you're a part of it. You could easily be a straight ally, and it's horrible that you're expected to either hate the queer community or be a part of it. I wish I could just voice my opinions and stand up for my community without having to choose between being safe or outing myself and not being safe. For example, he once took me up north on a holiday with his friends. I went downstairs in the morning to go get breakfast, and his friend was down there eating breakfast as well. And I had to sit and listen to his friend tell me all about how wrong it was to see 2 men holding hands walking down the street and how it like wasn't right. And all I could do was just sit there nodding, like looking down at my toast, hoping he'd just like suddenly move on from the topic of conversation, because I feel very powerless that I can't stand up for myself. But I do have some really positive adult role models who have definitely shaped my identity and being comfortable with myself. Sadly, I didn't really find them until later on. I was about year 10, so I was 16. That's a long time, obviously, to go through the world feeling isolated for your own identity. And I'd just come back from not being in school for almost a year because of stresses and mental illness. And I took RE, and I got a teacher who was the loveliest, most supportive person of me, and not just with my LGBT identity, but everything that I would struggle with in my life. And it made me feel so much better knowing that school wasn't just this place of hate, just as home was. It was a place that I had acceptance to now, even if it was just in this classroom and or just in the humanities department. So I remember an LGBT group was started up in my school, and I went to the session and it was useless. It just felt like there was a few LGBT students in the room, but none of us were getting support. And so I, with the encouragement and support of that teacher, set up my own LGBT group, and it meant the world to me that I had her supporting me and her on my side. I started to feel more confident and being out in my school, being known as someone who was part of the community and proud of it. As such, I got support from other teachers. They're there for, you know, your first day of year 7 to your last day of year 13. You go at school 5 days a week for about 6-7 hours. They're as vital to your growing up and your development as your parents are. So finding that support really meant the world to me, especially in contrast to the loneliness I felt at home. Sometimes people worry about asking me questions about the LGBT community. I'm grateful for their concern, but I know it's more in the way someone's asking, because I've had people being genuine and kind and trying to educate themselves in a way that I really appreciate as a member of the community. And I've also experienced quite hostile and aggressive people trying to trip me up rather than trying to actively understand my identity. I remember back when I was in year 11, I was in English class and we were watching a clip of Animal Farm, and I remember someone leaned over to me and handed me, like they'd written a note down saying, list 10 genders for me now. And it was completely out of the blue. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't really speak to this kid. I was just trying to, you know, study about Animal Farm for my coursework, and suddenly I was put on the spot. I sort of started writing things down, and then I thought, forget this, I've got better things to do with my time. I'm trying to pass my GCSE. I don't understand why people who approach me in such a demanding way can't, if they're genuinely interested, research themselves or ask me at a time when I'm not busy, occupied with something else. Whereas I have at other times had people either my age or younger trying to find themselves, or someone questioning, trying to understand the LGBT community, come up to me and ask me genuine questions. For example, I remember my tutor for year 12 and year 13, and he's this, you know, he's a man in his 60s, and he was asking me to explain my queer identity, but he was doing it in a way that he was trying his hardest to understand, and I felt like I appreciated him asking, and I took the time to try and relay this generational difference. I appreciate that if you truly do want to understand the LGBT community and you feel like asking me, I don't have a problem with that, but there's just this clear divide between hostility and being kind and genuine. It can be quite obvious to tell when somebody is being genuine, trying to find out information about the LGBT community, and when they are just trying to make a mockery of me and my identity for the sake of a joke. Going back to the incident of when somebody handed me a note in the middle of English asking me to list 10 genders, I knew that it was being done just to try and make fun of me and my identity, and that they weren't interested. They were just there trying to test me, trying to trip me up, and it felt horrible. People who do these things may not necessarily realise that I know that what they're trying to do, but it is obvious. Someone being caring versus someone being mocking of me. The media is very important to me, not just as an LGBT person, but in how I am represented in all aspects of media, and how other people are represented in all aspects of media, because it can be very negative or it can be very positive. It's important to me because I think when I see my identity reflected, I want it to be a good one and not feel like it's being distorted. For example, there are some really great LGBT representations, like there's the show Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which shows a diverse range of characters who are openly bisexual, a word that's often not used in media for fear of upsetting a heterosexual audience. And there are also gay characters who a story arc doesn't revolve around them being gay. That's not their one trait. It's not overly exaggerated. It's who they are, and that just happens to be an aspect of them whilst not driving their plot. which is very much how it is to be an LGBT person in reality. I am queer, I am very openly queer, I am happy being queer, and I celebrate it, but it's not all I am. I don't walk around the street shouting my identity, and it's not in everything I do explicitly, it's implicitly in everything I do. That's a key difference. Whereas there are other far more ridiculous LGBT representations, which I really hope going forward in society we can erase. I've noticed lots of villains in media are very effeminate and queer in the way they're presented and mediated. So if you take The Lion King, if you look at Scar, the main villain, his fur is darker and more villainous, but also he's got quite an aristocratic voice. It's quite effeminate in his posture, his body language, and that's sort of contrasted with Mufasa and Simba, the hypermasculine good guys of the story, who are much stronger and seem very much more typically in line with how we see straight males should be. Obviously, I'm not trying to say that Scar is gay. I'm trying to say that that's how we tend to see villains. Same goes with other Disney movies like Aladdin. Jafar is very much effeminate, or even if you take The Little Mermaid, Ursula is an exaggerated version of a drag queen from real life called Divine, and she is obviously a villain, she's demonized, and that hurts because I want to see my identity in a positive light rather than this negative or mocked one, and that's a massive difference between good and bad representation in the media.